our last unit, we are going to take a look at epidemiology. So epidemiology is the study of infectious disease and how they spread. So where are they distributed? What is the timing? Are they more prevalent in the summer, or is this more prevalent in the winter? How are they transmitted? What are the ideal hosts? What are our levels of herd immunity? So the idea behind epidemiology is trying to control outbreaks of disease. So within epidemiology, we have etiology, which is the study of the nature or the cause of the disease, and then how diseases are transmitted. So we've already taken a look at how diseases are transmitted. So what we're going to focus on here are really the tenets of epidemiology and look at several different terms that are used to help epidemiologists track diseases. So when we look at analyses, we're looking at how the disease is in a population. So we're always referencing a specific population of individuals. The state of being diseased is called morbidity. And so the morbidity rate is the number of diseased individuals within a standard number of population. So it could be a specific group, like women or men, or it could be a specific state or county or country. So morbidity is disease. Now, if we look at morbidity, we also want to look at prevalence and incidence. Prevalence is the number of individuals that have an illness in a specific population at a specific point in time. And so the example given here in your book is in 2012, there were about 1.2 million people 13 years and older with an active HIV infection. So this was the number of individuals with a particular illness in a specific population at a specific point in time. Incidence, on the other hand, is the new cases within a given time. So for this same year, 2012, in this same population, people 13 years and older, the CDC estimates there were 43,165 newly diagnosed cases. So prevalence is the number at a specific given time, and incidence is the number of new cases in that given time. We also have mortality. So mortality refers to death, and the mortality rate can be expressed as the percentage of the population that has died from a disease. So here is an example of prevalence and incidence. So you've got the active infections versus new infections. So prevalence being the red line, the total number at any given time, incidence being the blue line here. We also can have patterns of incidence, and there are 4 ways to identify patterns, or 4 types of patterns, you could say: sporadic, endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. So sporadic are diseases that are seen occasionally. No real geographic concentration, things that we just expect to see a few cases of every year. So things like tetanus, rabies, these are things that we know we're going to have every year, but they're kind of sporadic, a few scattered cases here and there. Endemic are diseases that are constantly present in a specific geographic area. So for instance, plague is endemic to southwest Arkansas or southwest United States, the Four Corners area. We know that we're going to have cases of plague every year, and the majority of those cases come from that specific geographic region. Epidemic diseases are when we have diseases that occur in larger numbers than what we would normally expect. And so the flu can be epidemic. If we have a flu season that's kind of out of control, we would say the flu is epidemic in that year. Sometimes we'll see measles epidemics. We don't really expect to see cases of measles because so many people are vaccinated against it. But sometimes we get a susceptible population and measles will spread throughout a population, and so that can be an epidemic. And then a pandemic is when an epidemic goes global. And so that's what we're in the middle of right now with the coronavirus. It's a pandemic because it's an epidemic that's occurred on more than one continent. When studying an epidemic, the first thing is to figure out the etiological agent or the causative agent. So you've got to figure out what is the pathogen that is causing these diseases. And of course, the CDC, if we're talking about the United States, the CDC is the main public health agency. And their goal is to protect the public from disease and injury. And there is a surveillance system called the National Notifiable Disease Surveillance System. And this coordinates regional, state, and territorial, so like Puerto Rico, Guam, public health departments. And they monitor diseases that are of public health importance. And so these are called notifiable or reportable diseases because all cases of these particular diseases have to be reported to the CDC. So if you have, we'll just say chlamydia, okay? Chlamydia is a notifiable, reportable disease. So if you go to your doctor and your doctor diagnoses you with chlamydia, then he or she is legally required to send a report to the Arkansas Department of Health. Well, to the Sevier County Health Department and then to the Arkansas Department of Health. And then the Arkansas Department of Health must in turn send that information to the CDC. And so you've got a few examples here of some notifiable diseases. And these are published in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And I've included a link to that along with these links to your textbook so that you can go through and you can look at what an example of a Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And looking at tracking disease, John Snow is kind of the father of epidemiology because he was the first to really sit down and be able to track a disease. And of course, he was looking at cholera in London. And his work kind of led us to some other definitions in terms of the spread of disease. So his work was what we refer to as a common source spread, in that there was a single source for all of the individuals that were infected, and that was the pump that was located on Broad Street. Types of common source spread include point source, continuous common source, or intermittent common source. So for point source, the common source is for a short time period, which is less than the incubation period of a pathogen. So this would be like a potato salad at a picnic. So it's a common source. It's the same thing that's making everyone ill, but it was there only for a very specific point in time. Continuous common source spread, the infection occurs for an extended period of time, and this is what happened in London. And then intermittent common source spread, infections occur for a little while, they stop, they begin again. And this could be something like a contaminated well that if it got a lot of rainfall, then it can cause disease. And then as that water seeps out, then the infections start. Propagated spread is through direct or indirect person-to-person contact. So with propagated spread, there is no single source for the outbreak. Each individual that's infected is going to spread it to one or more other individuals. With propagated spread, the infections are going to occur for a lot longer than the incubation period. Point sources lead to large-scale but localized outbreaks of short duration. Propagated spread results in longer duration. And the time frame or the size of the outbreak can be small to large. And so, of course, what we're in right now with the coronavirus pandemic is a propagated spread. It's spreading from person to person. So the rest of this section just goes through a little bit more about Florence Nightingale and John Snow's work with epidemiology, and then a little bit about the types of epidemiological studies that can be done. So I'm going to skip through and get to the last section in this chapter. We've already talked about section 16.3. So looking at 16.4 and global public health. So we have the World Health Organization. I've also included a link to it for you. The World Health Organization coordinates international public health issues. So we have the CDC for the United States and then the World Health Organization on a global scale. It maintains a global alert and response system, provides logistical support, coordinates international response, and then of course we contribute to that through the CDC. So the CDC and the World Health Organization, of course, monitor and prepare for what we refer to as emerging infectious diseases. So these are new to the population or an increase in prevalence. So the coronavirus would be an emerging infectious disease. A re-emerging infectious disease is a disease that increases in frequency after a previous period of decline. So this would be something like malaria, that we find medications to treat it, we get incidence rates down, and then the protozoan starts to become resistant to those, so cases begin to increase over time again. Here's some others. Chikungunya, that would be an emerging infectious disease. H1N1 was emerging, and then it kind of made a re-emergence a couple years ago. Lyme disease was discovered in 1981. That was an emerging disease. So that wraps up the section on epidemiology.